Thank you so much for coming to this last session, and I hope you are going to enjoy. I'm going to respect time and sharing insightful information about the data. Before I just present my my slides, I just want to, have a reflection of what happened for a researcher. So we have three things that always bother researchers. So we have research idea, we have methodology, and we have the data. So if you have a good idea, you start thinking about, okay, so which type of data I'm going to use. Before that, you can even think about the method that you can use to probably convince people. But then it comes issue of the data. And the data, especially in the micro data, has been a challenge on sub-Saharan Africa. And there are a number of issues that why we don't have really accurate data. So if you couple of minutes maybe to talk about the micro data, in 60s or 70s, there were issue of comparing countries, and World Bank and other international organizations, they start thinking about how can we harmonize the data on the continent. And I think in late 70s, there were a consensus to use the questionnaire and collecting different data. I remember one of the seminar Angus Deaton did during his Nobel Prize laureate was to explain how he was able to involve on those early stage of collecting microdata on the continent. I think first one was in Cote d'Ivoire, where they collected the information about the consumption. So this is to show that we have been really lagging behind in terms of microdata. And later in 2000, in the early 90s, we have the RCT, which also was, to come support the statistical information that have been collected across different countries. And the reason probably we don't have a lot of statistical data sets across different countries, probably the way they are collected, right? So we know they have massive information, but they are not harmonized across countries, and you barely find few questions that you're able to answer with those data, though they just cover important coverage of the population. So we also know that recently we have this data from the LSMS, the World Bank, that they collected across 8 countries, which eventually over the last 15 years, they increased the number of microdata on the continent. And there are a lot of people here who are really enjoying working with that. But with our current trend, we are now thinking about how can we use the existing data across different governments that can answer some of those critical questions that the continent has. And that's where UNU-WIDER, together with some countries on the continent, they have started putting together the administrative data and to bring this data on the disposal of the researchers and to be able to use them to answer some critical questions. So today I'm going to give you one of those cases in the context of South Africa, where United Nations World Development Economic UNU-WIDER, UNU-WIDER, United Nations University, World Institute of Development Economics Research, where he cooperated with South African government to establish the cooperation in terms of data sharing for research and also for informing policymakers. So the program that helped UNU-WIDER and South African government is called SA-TIDE. So this is the South African Towards Inclusive Economic Development, which essentially is the program that tackles research, capacity development, and the policy influence. Those 3 elements plays a key important role because we need to use those data to also capacitate local younger researchers and also to collaborate with policymakers to influence their decisions. And this has been really a successful story, which we believe in the long run, it will help for African continent to really understand how we can use the resources we have to better policy. So the program, I'm going to go to all those background, but the program started around 10 years ago, where UNU-WIDER collaborated with South African governments through National Treasury to better understand how can we develop our region. And that was in terms of, to develop the way to develop the opportunity in terms of employment. Also, how can we respond on economic obstacles? And that was, to think broadly in the Southern Africa region. And that program lasted around 3 years. And towards 2017, they found that they were successful steps where they basically collaborated with revenue services in South Africa, and they have one computer where they put CIT data, which played important role for those 3 years to understand the behavior of the farm, the labor market in the country, and they found that that could be, expanded and to be, something that they can use to showcase and to understand how the economy can be addressed, the challenge that they face. And from that time, they created what they call CSAE Phase 1 in 2018 to 2021, and where they created different thematic areas of research to really try to understand how the economy works. So we have those 6 economic thematic areas, which includes the job creation and growth, public revenue mobilization, inequality, and macro fiscal policy, and among others. So in this context, in the Phase 1, there was, to improve the collaboration between South Africa Revenue Services, which obviously accepts to share the data, and National Treasury and the development partners, which is UNU-WIDER. They basically agreed to use the policy evidence, collaborating between the researchers, sharing those data to researchers, and get those results from the researcher for the policy evidence decisions. But also there is another option of capacity development to allow the local younger researchers to understand the role and the use of administrative data for the academic development, but also for informing policymakers. So among the components of the phases that so far have been running in this program, one of them is so-called National Treasury Secure Data Facility. And this is the area where I would say that 70–80% of the program has been focusing on. And this is where to work from these 3 institutions, put together the tax administrative data in one space and invite researchers to come and use the data. I'm going quickly through some of those achievements, and you will just see that some of those incredible achievements that the Phase 1 of this program has really shown that it is a possibility the continent can use the resources they have to understand how their economy can move. So with CSAE, South Africa turned up to understand realistically what is the main obstacles of the employment in the country. What is the policy effect of different programs that the government undertake? Now, with this program, between 2019 and 2021, we are able to publish more than 200 working papers across different themes, given the data that have been shared. We are also able to have trainings of local younger researchers, workshops from different departments or ministries to understand how they can, understand the evaluation of different programs. Is it the program that they have implemented good? Is it bad? What can they change? Without having those data, you are not able to really program the next phase of your program or to understand whether you have successfully achieved or not. So there were a lot of opportunities during that phase. Around 11 PhD students have been graduated using this administrative data. Among also other things, we are able to provide different scholarships, and all of them were to benefit by using this administrative data in the lab. So here is some of the cases that I was mentioning about the publications. These are kind of working papers. It's not journal publications. I would like to clear that. So there are a lot of areas of research that with the farm data, we have been able to really provide a lot of insight, farms, productivity, tax, etc. So one of the components that have been successful, impressive in this program is the active engagement of the policymakers. Of course, it is not always each paper to be relevant for policymakers, but in the context of essay tide, we try to make sure that and request researchers, can you try to show the government how much they can benefit? So that's why you see here we are just showing a Minister of Finance in South Africa in the launch of phase 2, where everyone was really, really happy to see how much the program has given even fresh air for policymakers, not fearing researchers that what they are doing can affect them, but rather they have understood that their changes, their policies can be driven by data, and data can help them to move forward. So this is why they are really, we appreciate how the government and the policymakers in South Africa came up to understand that with this data sharing, they are able to formulate clearly and they are able to accept the changes which could not necessarily show that they have done well, because then from what they see that it hasn't been done well, they are able to understand how to change it in the next phases. So, and what we do in this second phase, which started 3 years ago, was to improve what we have done, but also expand the data. So I will explain a little bit after. So one of the things is to keep understanding the need of the researchers. What do you want to make better policy? So maybe we need to bring in new other data sets. What we do is collaborate again with the revenue services, bring in new data sets that researchers need, so that they can make sure that they help to understand, to respond to some of those critical questions in South Africa. Also, to keep improving the capacity development. And also, this has really improved the efficient communications between the policymakers and the researchers. We organize on a quarterly basis the policy debate, where we invite different policymakers to come up and discuss on the panel with some researchers, given the result or different findings that we got from the research programs. So we have different partners across this program. We have UNU-WIDER, we have National Treasury, who basically is the owner of this data, and we have the South Africa Revenue Services, and that's really also the key player, because they are able to share, they are willing to share all the data that they house on all the farms in South Africa. And also we have the FCDO support, and we have EU that came in later on this program. So I want to take the next 10-15 minutes before you can ask a question to just talk about the data that we have. I'm sure this is very interesting. Without data, even if you have a smart idea, it will just die in your cupboard. So this is where we can probably think that we need to go on and help the African countries to, harmonize the way they collect their administrative data. I think that would be the best investment you can do. Whenever there is a possibility, helping the African countries, engaging with them if they can, harmonize their data recording and help researchers to really understand how they can improve the economy. So I have 3 minutes of a policymaker at South African National Treasury who is going to tell us why the admin data has helped them.
Often, as a policymaker, you work a little bit in the dark. It's hard to know, is what you're doing having an impact?
Ultimately, it's about the policies, how they impact the lives of ordinary South Africans in a way that meaningfully can contribute to growth in the future. If you don't have the data, you can't answer any of these questions.
Pretoria, South Africa. On the 20th floor of the National Treasury, there sits an ordinary desk. On this desk, data on every firm in the country. For the first time in Africa, a government has opened up this data to researchers. The hope is that research can help lead to better policy.
For us, data is very important, and my team is responsible for economic analysis. We are a consulting unit to other units of the National Treasury and government, as we do work with the National Planning Commission, the Department of Human Resources, the Department of Age. So as a unit which is highly dependent on data to do our work, data is very important.
What data allows us to do is to evaluate government policy, to look back in time and understand what has been the impact of government policy. Did we get the value for money that we expected to get? And how can one redesign those programs going forward to make better use of these resources?
One key area where data and evidence have been missing in South Africa is on firms.
Firms are the growth drivers, the job creators in our economy that are paying taxes which we then use to pay for schools, to pay for infrastructure. Economists in South Africa, the academic researchers, the policymakers, did not have access to a view of how these firms behave, who they are, which sectors they are in, do they participate in international markets, are they small, are they big, what are their age profiles, are they fast growing or slow growing, what is their productivity. So that information just was not available. We were unable to internalize that information in our policy making.
The National Treasury, together with UNU-WIDER, have embarked on a multi-year program to address this problem. Rather than find new data, the solution they have come up with is to follow international best practice and open up an existing pool of data, tax data on each firm, data that are already being collected yearly by the South African Revenue Service.
It's being collected as part of an administrative process, but it can be used by researchers to generate empirical research.
Research and policy working together may sound nice, but it is easier said than done. With UNU-WIDER, however, the project had a partner that had done it before.
We know the academics in the country that are interested in doing this kind of work. We know the policymakers who are interested in the outputs, who want to know results to key questions. What WIDER brought was confidence in both of those sides, that this could be done. We had done it before in Vietnam. We were able to organize a large workshop where we brought policymakers from all across the government, really at the technical levels, people really interested in research. And we brought leading academics who indicated these are the kinds of policy questions that we can answer if we have access to this data. We were able to back that up with international experts who went and said, in Vietnam, we went and looked into this particular question at the request of, say, the Ministry of Planning and Investment. We arrived at this conclusion.
Thank you. Sorry. Just I want to come back. Thank you. So the reason I put this was to give us an idea of how to develop a confidence for policymakers. We know that there is a challenge of approaching policymakers because sometimes they need to see the relevancy of your project, and that's really important. So because they have their mandate for the welfare of their people, they need to see how much your research is going to help them. So what UNU-WIDER did in this context was to develop the confidence among the partners so that they are willing to share the data and able to help researchers to have entire data sets so that they are able to analyze the research using the existing data. So briefly, this is the big program that we are having in South Africa. We have a lot of people working on that mostly the data developers, research assistants to help people to really access the data. We have a team of around 13 people. And if we look at only 1 year, that was 2024, we have around 57 working papers. We have around more than 1,000 bookings, people who just booked to come have access in the lab. And we have a number of data sets that I'm going to explain, the key data set, and a few more ones that we are aiming to bring in. So what is the purpose of the lab? The purpose of the lab is to bring in anonymized data. So with that confidence, somebody will share with you the data, but you need to make sure that the data is fully anonymized. It cannot be shared outside the lab, but also it is hashed. So you are not able to understand which farm you are working with. But you are able to get every farm in the country and its characteristics as they are reported in the certificate that they fill and they report to the relevant services. So the aim of that also is to, to help the policy research. We are lucky to have policymakers who believe in research. So that's why we are able to share some findings with them, have policy debate, and let them decide on which one they have to implement and which one not. So it's also a strategic meeting where policymakers, researchers meet and discuss which policy do you have that you wish to see whether it has the impact or not. Which one do you feel we're able to pattern and see whether it can have an impact or not. This, why administrative data? It's just come back on the question I started in introduction. If you see back some years back, actually the admin data has been used in different, especially in developing countries where they have access on those micro data. If we talk about the Scandinavian countries, you know that they have data that lasts more than 300-400 years ago. So that allow people to really use those data. Even in top journal, you can see between 80s to 2010, there were a lot of increase of the use of administrative data. But later you can find one of those papers from African continent because we don't have this admin data, it's at least in a more proper shape that can be used. So I don't want to preach on the relevance of the admin data, but if you think about the job of the 13 people that we are on the program in South Africa, what we are doing, we are cleaning the data for the entire country on the farm. Think about any business that is recorded by the farmer and reported, we are able to, to clean the data. So if you think about that magnitude, if you are able to correct that data, you lose billions and billions. But 13 people are doing just simple job, advancing knowledge, cleaning data, and matching the disposal of the researchers. So in terms of the cost, it is really cheap to use administrative data than probably conducting the entire survey, if you can. So this is the large data set, which includes everyone. We have a universe, so we are avoiding the issue of attrition among others. Of course, there's different challenges. So if you go on in this case about the records, some of them, they don't have, the documentation. So they give you the server to extract the data, but then they didn't keep the records of what's going on. So you need, proper care of dealing with these things, look at different certificates, understand why these records are like that. So it's a big challenge, but manageable, having people to think about how to clean the data and to make proper documentation, technical note, to help researchers to understand and use the data. These are the key data sets we have in South Africa. So we have the CIT, which is basically the backbone of the farm, and the characteristics as the farm report on the certificates. So we have the payroll and we have the customs data. So if I say, for instance, the customs data, you can have it at a transaction level, or we can just maybe, make collapse for you. If you want transaction level, we'll give you the entire data set and you see for every farm that ever transacted, exported or imported. You will see how much they exported, quantity, the amount, where they exported, all those things, and the time. So we use this data to define two different data sets. So having a farm panel and an individual panel. So when we use the farm information from CIT, and we combine it with the payroll certificate to get about the employment and the customs, as well as the value addition, then we have the farm panel. So basically, we will have every farm in the economy, how much they sell, how many employees they have, how much they pay, how much, let's say, tax, VAT input tax, VAT output tax, or any transaction or any information that appear on this farm, it is recorded. We also use two information from the payroll certificate, locally they call it IERP5 or IT3A, to have information about the employment, and also to use the personal income tax to formulate what we call individual panel. So here we are going to have any employment, informal employment, to have information about the employee, how much he earns, where he worked, which time, etc. These are the key information that we have in the data. Obviously, there are a lot, but just to give you a sense of the basic information we have. So what did we cover? We cover information on the compliance taxpayers. Basically, somebody who is in the informal economy, we are able to share that information with the researchers, and somebody who is compliant. So somebody who is able to respect what revenue services is requesting, declaration and reporting, among others. Also, with this respective threshold. So if you are able to be within those who are required to pay tax or to declare, or who are able to fill the tax certificate. Most of the data we have, it starts from 2008 onwards. And we usually have 1 or 2 years lag because the tax declaration takes some time. Some of them, they report a little bit later. So we normally encourage researchers to use data up to 2 years before the current time. I just did some random selection to show that actually our data does not only provide policymakers with what they want, but also our researchers, they are using to publish. So these are some of those papers that are in development top journals that provide, an insight of how much the people who are using our data are able to publish in top journal their papers. I just randomly selected a few of them. What are we doing now? What's the current undertakings? Obviously, with time, researchers have been, asking a lot. So this is not enough. We have only data on farm. But if you talk with somebody maybe on education, you say, oh, do you have information about, the education of those employees, etc.? So we say, no, we don't have. So these are some of the items that are currently being undertaken. One is to consider the third-party data. For instance, the third-party data is not necessarily data collected by revenue services in tax certificate, but also can be reported by another institution at SAS. So, yeah, we are trying to put the other third-party data to the lab. We also provided the spatial data. There were a lot of concern about, I don't know where the farm is. There are some of the questions you can't respond if you don't know where the location of the farm or the employees. We have tried to bring the data. Now it's being undertaken. So we make sure that, somebody who has a research question which will need spatial dynamics is able to have that. And also we are trying to work with different departments or ministries to bring in their data. And some of them, especially from the human capital, the basic education, the higher education, and also the UIF, unemployment insurance fund. Insurance fund. So this component is being also undertaken so that researchers are able to really have more options to match on the tax data. So we finally also put in place the documentation. We put metadata in place to make sure that every researcher is able to understand what type of variables do we have, what is the meaning of those variables, etc. And we also created the dummy data set. This is the fake data that we share. We just share the data code with the researcher before you just access the lab. And then what you do essentially is just run those code. It will generate you all the variables that we have with fake values. Then you are able to, to understand what can you do with the data before you come in the lab. We also create what we call README's technical node, to always allow researchers to understand the type of the data that we have before you are able to come in the lab. This is an example of the summary of the data we have on some of those extracted from different certificates. Probably with a matter of time, I'm not going to stay there. So what do we do to build the confidence in South Africa is to make sure that the data is fully protected. And here, we just use this picture to show you how we get the data and how it gets fully secured. So the data is collected through taxpayers and firms. They fill the forms and they send to SAS. They declare what they have done and how they have to give tax. So what we do, we have some team at SAS who has to extract the data from their server and anonymize them. Make sure that they are anonymized in the same way. Use the same algorithm for the firm, for individuals or employees, etc. And then we get that data and you bring in the lab. It comes to National Treasury. This is the revenue services in South Africa, which house the data. We get them, we bring in the lab at National Treasury, and then we just clean the data into two categories. One to make individual panel, another one to make firm panel. So basically, any data we get from SAS, we either need to align with individual or to align with the firm. So to make sure that anyone who wants to use the data at individual level, at employee level, you are able to go on that side. Or if you want to use the data at firm level, you are coming on the other side. Obviously, we just share with researchers, and we hope to get a policy as one of the key considerations for our partners in South Africa. So we make sure that we have exclusive protocols to make sure that the data is really protected. We don't allow sticks. So all the terminals that you will allow you to access does not have where you can put stick. There's one central unity everybody will get his result from. You do all your regressions facing every individual, every firm, and then you are just shared by one research assistant on restricted terminal where the output all are shared. So just a couple of protocols that I put here. What can live in, what can't live. So you can't go with the table which has for instance, which has less than 10 observations. We make sure that we don't allow you to go like selective. Maybe you are targeting a company, then because you are able to, then you don't allow you to go with those type of tables or figures. So we make sure that you can't go with less than 10 observations in your table, among others. We have a cross-check on your table, and all of this we basically avoid to have a problem with partners and also with the taxpayers. These are the data taxpayers. It's so sensitive. If you are able to protect, then people can have confidence in you. But also, if you are not able to do that, then no one will believe in what you are doing. So we make sure that you are doing research for your publication, but also helping policymakers to understand what they can do better, not compromising. So here is what we share. Again, as I mentioned, we share normally whatever you have done. tables, figures, your code. We can also bring in all your maps, shape files, or your code. We just give on the exclusive terminal to share on your workbench so that you are able to use what you have brought in to merge or to speak more on what you are doing. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, so this successful program in South Africa has provided more undertakings on how can we help other African continent countries to really exploit the resources they have, to understand better how they can position their policy. So apart from South Africa, they have been a new lab in Uganda, which started in 2023, if I'm not 2022, sorry if I'm not mistaken. Professor Yuka was here. I think he is one of the leading person there. We have also another one to start in Zambia, and all of this has been really in this engagement, visiting our lab in South Africa, see how much we are doing, and we bring a lot revenue services, because we believe that revenue services, they are more targeting to collect money. So if they are confidently able to share the data, because they want to understand how can I collect more money in the country. So I think that's the starting point. They are all really enthusiastic. They are willing to share by building the lab within their vicinity, have an eye and a control on what they are sharing, but also learning more on how they can use their data. So there are a couple of ways you can use to get access on the data. One way we do normally launch the calls for funding. I'm sure some of you have seen those calls. Another way is to just develop your proposal, go on website or essay type, and then there's a form you fill, you put one page idea, and then you send, there's an email you send, and then a couple of weeks, people will come back to you saying, there's this data you have asked, maybe you need to clarify, or everything is fine, then you can come. We normally don't reject proposals unless it doesn't, match with the data we have. So we make sure that we need you to achieve your potential. We allow you to come, but also there is restriction of the lab access because we have limited resources, we have limited space. We make sure that these 10 to 15 computers, you book it and you are able to access when your time arrives. So in conclusion, I would just come back on what I started with. I think there is this trend where now you can see that there is a lot of technology being developed. Some of the countries are catching up. Some others are still behind. But if you think about development, everyone needs to go with someone else. If somebody will leave behind, then it's difficult. So one of the things is, sharing this experience, but also try to develop the confidence among the policymakers. And that's not enough because some countries are still lagging behind in terms of how they work, bureaucracy, how they do their businesses. There's no efficiency. But if you think about the efficiency, you have really to do some of the system harmonization. I think Justice presented a paper in the morning about Kenya in procurement. If you think about the data they used without digitalization of the data, then you can do that type of project. So one of the things to system harmonization, I think, is to digitize the public services. I just put one country, one system. Rwanda has a program called Aimable. Some of you have heard about it. In Rwanda, everything is in Aimable. So if you want any service in the government, it's in Aimable. So you want procurement, basically any system, any activity that you want from the service. You don't pay money anywhere. You have to pay and receive it by Aimable system, and you go where the institution have to give you the service. They have now stored the agencies in hospitals and health centers. So a newborn is registered the right way, and he got ID. That's the same ID they would use in high school. That's the same ID they would use in the tax if they want to be a business makers. You need to think about all those things because it has drastically reduced inefficiency, and that's why you heard about it most this type of success, it only can come if there is some commitment of really making the system working together, and you are able to understand the dynamics of every corner of the sector in the economy. So, of course, there is an issue of capacity development, which I think the development partners, researchers, they are able to really plan and understand how can we really leverage and help those countries to develop their capacity to harmonize their system, to develop IT, to harmonize their tax system, the health, the education. All those things, they go hand in hand. So you develop one, if the other one is not going together, then you still have some challenges. So this was my presentation. Sorry for speeding. Thank you. Any question, clarification?
I just want to ask, do you have data on informal firms? So thank you for the presentation. It was really, really interesting. I have a quick question. So I know you're using tax data, so you have information on formally registered firms, but do you also have some information on informal firms in South Africa?
Unfortunately, no. You can see it's only those who are able to work in informal economy.
Thank you.
Here.
Thank you. Similarly, it's very specific. Since 2022, 2023, people with assets above, I think it's 50 million or something in South Africa, have to declare it. Will this be incorporated into your data set? And if so, will this be linked with the individual income panel?
Yeah, I think there are those records that have been started, I think 2022, about the wealth tax. Yeah, but that data we don't have. It is, owned by SARS. But I think we will probably have this year, very soon. There is one project, one professor is conducting a project on the wealth tax. And given that South Africa is hosting G20 this year, so there is a proposal that this project about the wealth tax will be conducted, and it's going to use that data you were mentioning. Hopefully, then other researchers eventually will use them. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Hi. Please, do you have information on, say, maybe reforms that impact either the individuals or the firms, and information on when the reform was originally announced and when the reform was implemented? And the third one then is, if reforms that require compliance, do you have information about compliance about those reforms?
Yeah, thank you so much. That's an interesting question. So what we do have we normally provide the data in the lab. The data which, covers, every firm. But when it comes to the reform, it's usually implemented by the policymakers. And it's a question of, researchers to understand which question I need to do. Is it to evaluate a particular program that has been implemented by the government? Is it, a particular decision to expand maybe the minimum wage at given threshold in the country? Then the researchers will just come, obviously, to try to understand the impact of minimum wage on employment or something like that. But we usually don't have that information in the data. So we allow space for the researchers to know which type of questions that will be analyzed considering those type of programs and evaluating them. Thank you.